When we think of the word success, when we think of what it means to be a successful person, how do we define that? What is success? Do we measure success in terms of wealth? Do we measure success in terms of how many followers we have on Facebook? Do we measure success in terms of the size of our house? In terms of the way our children are growing? How many after-school activities they're in? Their GPA? How do we measure success? Just a few minutes before, or an hour or so before, we heard the adhan for Salat al-Maghrib. And we heard the mu'adhin call, Hayya ala al-salah, Hayya ala al-falah. Hasten to prayer. Come to prayer. Hasten to success. Come to success. Our success in this dunya and in this akhirah is linked to our prayer. Our success is linked to our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's where our success lies. But we are raised in a world that tries to tell us differently. We're raised as women from a very young age, where we are told that to be successful, we need to complete our education. We need to get that bachelor's. We need to get that master's. We need to get that PhD or that MD. To be successful, we need to marry well. We need to marry that doctor. We need to marry that engineer. To be successful, we must raise boys who will carry on the name of the family, who will become doctors and engineers. And we must raise girls who will also marry well. We are told to be successful that we have to become superwomen. But that's not what the Quran tells us. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of. In Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, as He speaks to both men and women, and says, indeed, the believing men and the believing women, the Muslim men and the Muslim women, the men who guard their chastity and the women who guard their chastity, the men who do good deeds and the women who do good deeds, for them there is great reward. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that man or woman, female or male, we will not be judged by our gender, but we will be judged by the merit of our deeds. We will be judged by our actions. We will be judged by what we do to please Him. Because the purpose of our creation, whether man or woman, is to worship the Creator. And we worship our Creator in the good that we do. We worship our Creator by pleasing Him. What it means to be a successful woman is a woman whose heart is anchored in the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a woman who recognizes that she will be tested, but she will be tested in a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows she can bear. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never burden a soul with a burden that is greater than she can bear. And yet we look at childbirth, and many of the scientists who study childbirth will say it is amazing the amount of pain that a female body can withstand in those moments of childbirth. They transcend comprehension. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created women who are strong enough and resilient enough, physically, emotionally, mentally, to be able to bear that pain of childbirth and to continue to bear the trials and the tribulations of tarbiyah, but also to taste the sweetness of it. How do we raise our girls? How do we raise our young women, the next generation, who will lead and continue to lead the next generations to come and to come, who will be the Muslim Americans of the future? How do we raise them? How do we teach them what it means to be successful with a heart that is anchored in that love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We teach them. We teach them, we guide them, we show them by our actions. We've talked quite a bit about parenting, and I know most of my sessions this conference was about parenting. And we spoke at length about the importance of not possessing our children, because we as women will sometimes find ourselves in a place where our love can suffocate, where our love can move from the realm of a healthy love and into a love of possession, of control. And this is why, as a marriage counselor, one of the things that we see frequently in our center as well is problems related to the parents. Because when there is a love that is unhealthy, that suffocates, when we feel that our children are our possessions, we've lost sight of what it means to be successful as a mother, because our love has shifted. And it is no longer a love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that our heart is anchored to. You know, there was a man by the name of Greg Mortensen who used to climb mountains in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. And there came a time when he was climbing the mountains and he fell and got hurt. And so a family in Afghanistan took him in, and they drank with him 3 cups of tea. And they said to him, now that we have drunk 3 cups of tea together, we are like family. And the man was so taken by this, he said, I promise that if I make it back to the US, I will start a foundation, and I will raise money to build schools in your country. So true to his word, Greg Mortensen came back to the US, and he started a foundation known as Pennies for Peace. And he began to raise money to build schools. And he went back to Afghanistan and Pakistan, and he did build these schools that he had promised. But the schools that he built were for girls, only for girls. And so some of the media and the journalists were interviewing him, and they were asking him, why are you only building schools for girls? And he responded and said, if I educate a boy, I have educated an individual. If I educate a girl, I have educated a generation. Because the education of our girls is key. But when we talk about education, we are not just talking about getting that bachelor's, that master's, that PhD, or that MD. We are talking about the education of life. What does our daughter's character look like? What does our daughter's akhlaq, their adab? What is the state of their heart? How is their salah? How is our salah? If we find ourselves skipping our salah because we have to run to soccer practice, we have to go to Kuman, we have to drop our children off at Mathnasium or here and here and here, then we cannot say that this is success. Because when we lose that block, when we lose that foundation, then we lose what our success must be built upon. So guiding our girls through education, teaching them by action, bringing them back to the deen. But it starts with us. It starts with us as mothers, as aunts, as sisters, as friends, as neighbors. It starts with us reaching out to each other, connecting with one another, recognizing that our definition does not come from a book written by a feminist. Our definition does not come from the media. Our definition does not come from Beyonce or from Katy Perry. Our definition comes from a much higher power. Our definition, our worth, who we are as women, our success comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us all to the successful path, to the righteous path. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides our daughters to that path as well and makes us of the most righteous that will enter into His Jannah. Jazakum Allahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.